So let me start with you. Did some work related to where we are in the debt in our country. And the Heritage Foundation's had several pieces out. You've written and been part of, I guess, panels that talked about it. But, you know, the debt is one of those issues where everybody will say, oh, yes, every candidate especially, I'm concerned about the debt. Yes, it's terrible. We have to get spending under control. And yet, it never happens. We go to Washington or we're in Texas here, Austin, or wherever your state capital is, and the temptation of politicians is to spend to create programs to allegedly help people, and the debt gets worse and worse, and there never seems to be a political price to pay. People don't turn against their Congress member or their state representative, say, well, I'm not going to vote for you again because you didn't do anything about the debt. It seems with this problem, we all agree it's a problem, no political consequence, no incentive to solve it. So I'll start with just the idea. Can you tell us in an overview economics way, how bad is our debt? Give us some data points, help us understand how bad America's debt is.
Yeah. So one data point is the average or typical American household earns about $60,000 per year, working all year long. The national debt, if we divided it up by every American, not household, every American, is already over $67,000. Now, if you look at a three-person household, that's over $200,000. That is a mortgage without a house that is on the head of every American person, because the way the federal government is able to borrow in international and domestic markets is on the credit of the American taxpayer. It is with the understanding that Americans will be able to produce enough in terms of goods and services to be able to service the debt. And our interest is already rising despite these very low interest rates that are, frankly, artificially low because of Federal Reserve policy that is undermining the stability of the dollar, of our money in the long run. And even with those low interest rates, the interest on the debt rose by 30% over just the past 2 years. Imagine what your interest is, say if you have a mortgage or a car loan, and that went up by more than 30%, by 1/3 over just the past 2 years. Many American families would find themselves in a bind to continue financing that interest, and that is what's happening with our country. Those are the numbers, the $22 trillion national debt on a level that hopefully more Americans can understand. It's already more than what the entire U.S. economy produces in goods and services on an annual basis. And that only accounts for the debt we've already incurred, that we've already borrowed. It doesn't take into account all of the promises, all of the unfunded obligations the federal government is confronting. Medicare and Social Security, they're going to run out of money in the near-term future for Social Security recipients. And this is not some far-off future for the next generation, but people retired today could be faced with a 25% benefit cut if we don't fix this program. Medicare is running out of money even sooner. That affects Medicare Part A. So the overall gap between these promises for just Social Security and Medicare and what we have set aside to pay with current tax policies is about $500,000 per person. So it's unbelievable. The numbers are staggering.
They are. And I'm looking at two different pieces that came from the Heritage website. And for our listeners, all the documents or all the articles I'm referring to today, you can find on our website, americacanwetalk.org. On the homepage, under shows, go down, list of links. Several little data points I'm going to pull out that I love your summary. I love putting it in the way that many people can understand the idea of your family earns this or your family's debt is this, but here's what your debt is for the country. But here's some interesting things. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid currently consume 72% of current tax revenue. So these are not programs paying for our military, not programs paying for the FAA keeping us safe or infrastructure, all these things we agree, especially the military. 72% of our current tax revenue is eaten up by Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. But the one that really caught my attention, there are a bunch of facts I'll throw out. By 2025, the interest on the national debt, the interest on the debt will be more than more than defense spending. I mean, it is untenable. One last little factoid I was going to throw in, then I have a question for you, was the idea that, let me just find it again. Interest on the debt will, spending on interest on the debt will exceed Medicaid within 1 year, and 5 years will overtake all defense spending. By 30 years from now, just interest on the debt will be projected to be the single largest federal expenditure. So, Romina, you're with Heritage Foundation. You guys are the idea factory of the country. Do you have a suggestion for Congress, like what they're supposed to do about this in a realistic way?
Yes, we actually have a plan, and we have had a plan for many years now, and we just released our plan for this year. It's called the Blueprint for Balance, and it contains more than 250 policy reforms to put the budget on a path to balance before the end of the 10-year period, which is the budget cycle that Congress considers, while making the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act permanent, because this is something that people also need to understand. It is not for a lack of tax revenue that our deficits and debt are growing at this enormous rate. It is actually tax revenue is going up even after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It is overspending. It is out of control spending. It is the fact that healthcare spending is growing at an average rate of 6% annually. Now, if you think about President Trump is proud of getting 3% growth, 3% economic growth.
Yep.
Healthcare costs are growing at twice the rate. And then we have Social Security, and we have other welfare programs, and we have all the spending increases that Congress has voted for, including just today the House voted on a package for $1 trillion in spending that blows through spending restraints. So we have a plan. It's called the Blueprint for Balance. It's available at heritage.org. The president's budget, President Trump's budget, includes about 61% of the Blueprint for Balance proposals. So we've made good progress in getting the administration on board with the vast majority of our proposals. They've also been introduced in Congress, more than half of them as part of the Republican Study Committee budget in the House of Representatives. But the budget hasn't gotten a vote. Congress is proceeding with spending money this year without actually having agreed on a budget. So what the American people can do is their lawmakers need to hear from them. They need to know that this is a serious issue that the American people care about and that the American people expect results. And the American people should demand that Congress pass a budget. There's a bill in the Senate by Senator Braun that says no budget, no pay. Senator Joni Ernst has a bill that says no budget, no recess. These are common sense proposals that say Congress's number one responsibility is to actually pass a budget. They haven't done that in so many years. Yet spending continues. So that's the first step. We need to actually put in place incentives and enforcement measures to make Congress do its job, and it might just have to mean that we don't pay them until they get the job done.
I could go over that. I'll tell you, Romina, I found on your website, on Heritage's website, the Blueprint for Balance, the federal budget for fiscal year 2020. And I was actually going to print out the whole thing because I would love to dive into it. It was like 320 pages. So I settled for printing out the table of contents. And I note you had a lot of involvement in writing this and preparing, analyzing things. I think why I so appreciate Heritage is because you have so many substantive, serious experts who will take on the hard policy issues and give Congress a path forward. Because what I was saying earlier, what happens is there are people in both parties who run for office, and they do really mean that they care about the debt and the annual deficit, and they want to do something about it. But any proposals that anyone makes, even when Republicans attempted, whenever it was, 10, 12 years ago, to talk about making minor adjustments to Medicare so that or to Social Security, so that perhaps people who are not in financial need, maybe they get less, maybe change the age of eligibility. Any effort to even touch any program is instantly vilified by the mainstream media, by the leftists in this country, and portrayed in some horrific way, pushing Granny over the cliff in the wheelchair. And so the idea that Heritage has put together this blueprint, I just think it gives candidates something easy to say. I want to fix the budget. No one person in Congress can. No one member of the Senate Senate or House, but if we all got behind this budget, or at least this was the baseline of discussion, you give them a way to say, I'm serious about it and I'll vote for this without having to go out on a limb and say, well, I think we should cut X and we should trim Y and we should change this. All the things that can be so easily vilified. I love that you guys do this, and I love that you created this blueprint. So you just mentioned for our listeners again, but tell them how they can find this blueprint.
It's on heritage.org/blueprint for balance. And for additional educational tools around the federal budget, which is just so big and complex, we also have a website called federalbudgetinpictures.com.
Great. Well, I'm going to have to ask you to come on another time because I actually loved several things that you wrote and talked about. I can't get to them today, but I heard your commentary about the gripe that rich people don't pay their fair share and that nobody really got a tax cut, both of which were false. So I'm going to say, Romina, you are just a great guest. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Debbie. It was my pleasure.
Great, and I would love to ask you back, and we can talk about whether people actually, got a tax cut and who pays their fair share. So that, my friends, was Romina Boccia. She's with the Heritage Foundation, full of information, and honestly, they talk about issues that it's so hard for the average politician, the average member of either party, House or Senate, to get into the weeds on any particular things to fix the federal budget and the debt because it's so easily vilified, so easily attacked, and it just is easier for politicians to go to Washington, keep spending, thinking somehow, someday this will get fixed, and it really is at a crisis point. So love Heritage, love having her on.